Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
The 2024 Indigenous Media Conference, organized by Indigenous Journalists Association, took place from July 25 to 27 in Oklahoma City, United States. The event brought together Indigenous journalists, media professionals, and experts from around the world to discuss and address the pressing issues faced by Indigenous media practitioners. The conference also provided an opportunity to celebrate their contributions and achievements. Cultural Survival was also present at this landmark event and asked Indigenous journalists to share their experiences, challenges, and successes in covering Indigenous communities and their efforts in collaborating for Indigenous rights.
My name is Bryan Pollard. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, which is based in Oklahoma in the United States. I am formerly the executive editor of the Cherokee Phoenix, which is the tribal newspaper for the Cherokee Nation, and was the first Native American newspaper published in North America in 1828. It was also the first bilingual publication published in English and Cherokee, a tradition that they continue to this day. I'm now at the Associated Press, and I am a manager of grant operations. I have nearly 20 years of experience working in Indigenous journalism. I've been an active member of the Indigenous Journalists Association for more than 20 years. And I've seen a lot in that time. I've seen how press freedom in Indian country is very inconsistent. Some tribes have a high level of press freedom, meaning that they have almost complete editorial independence. And many tribes, they have no editorial independence. It's the politicians and the elected tribal leaders that control the media that goes out to their people. One of the greatest challenges that I see in Indian country is that most media are not financially independent. And what I mean by that is often they're very small outlets. They have very small audiences, and they're in very remote locations, which means they can't really support advertising or many of the traditional streams of revenue that can support an independent media. And because of that, they are reliant upon the tribe and the tribal government to subsidize their operations. And therein creates a tremendous conflict because when you have the government basically paying to run the media outlet, the government then thinks it has control over the message and the coverage of the outlet. And so a lot of my work over the years has focused on how do we best create that firewall between the government and the editorial functions of tribal media so that they can exercise truly independent journalism. Is the solution to create a constitutional amendment so that press freedom is enshrined in their constitution? Is there legislation that can be passed so that there is a law that protects independent media? Or can it happen at an executive level, meaning the principal chief or the governor of the tribe can actually do an executive order ordering that independence? And so we look at these options, and many of these things have actually been tried in Indian country. Some have been quite successful, others not so much. But I think the real takeaway is that even in the areas where we've seen success, it's only in a very small number of communities. There's more than 500 federally recognized tribes in the United States. There's almost 200 just in California alone. There's probably almost that number in Alaska as well. And so the number of outlets that we see that have really successfully maintained editorial independence is quite small. And so how do we put the the statutes in place or the regulations in place to ensure that all indigenous communities in the United States have those kinds of protections. That's one of the great challenges that I've looked at, and I dedicate my studies to, and I dedicate my work to, and hopefully we'll continue to see positive outcomes. One of the things that I look at quite often that I think is one of the most challenging parts is, how are you going to be funded? Where is that source of funding going to come from that is going to allow you to not only sustain your operation, but grow? And not because, many of the outlets that we have in the United States, they're very small outlets. They might be 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people. We see many tribal outlets that are very small. And so it's one thing to be able to sustain a staff of that size, but it's another thing to be able to grow it so that you can actually cover your community in a meaningful way, and also expand the type of coverage that you do. And what I mean by that is, are you reporting and those stories are just appearing in text and they're maybe in a newsletter or they're on a website? Or do you have the capacity to maybe do a video story? Or do you have a capacity to maybe get your story on radio? Or do you have capacity to do some sort of multimedia reporting? Do you have the capacity to do data reporting and to have data research? Do you have the capacity to do investigative reporting? These are all things that can be quite costly. We want all Indigenous media to be able to grow into those capacities, but you have to have financing to not only sustain the operation, but to be able to grow the operation. One thing that we're looking really closely at while we're at IJA this year is this idea of international collaborations. So how can outlets who might be small outlets, but there are also maybe quite large outfits, how can they collaborate together and share resources so that not only is their reporting improved, but their distribution and their capability to report is also improved? How do they collaborate so that the smaller outlets actually benefit from the greater capacity of the bigger outlets? And also, what does collaboration with a mainstream newsroom look like? Oftentimes, mainstream newsrooms have much greater resources and capacities than smaller Indigenous newsrooms. So how might partnering with a mainstream outlet improve the capacity and the ability to report with Indigenous media? And what is necessary to make those collaborations work? Because we've seen examples where Indigenous media have attempted to collaborate with mainstream, and it has just gone wrong because the mainstream outlet just does not understand the sensibilities that are necessary to be able to effectively collaborate and tell Indigenous stories, even when they have an Indigenous partner. So that's one of the main things, is identifying where is that funding going to come from? Are you going to try to raise that revenue on your own? Do you have an audience that is going to support that kind of revenue? Or do you need to get it from some other source? Are you going to be able to get it from philanthropy? Is there enough philanthropy interested in supporting you that they might support media? Or is it going to come from government? Are you going to get it from the government of your community? And if that's the case, is there going to be a firewall put in place so that they know, even though they're funding you, that they are not going to have editorial control over how you report?
For more information on Indigenous rights, visit ces.org/rights, and also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Facebook.